The fluorescent lights above aisle 3 have been flickering for the past 20 minutes, casting strobing shadows across the rows of candy bars and potato chips. Chen pressed his palm against the counter, trying to steady his breathing as he watched the security monitor. The timestamp read 3:47 a.m. The store had been empty for hours. Except it wasn't empty anymore. On screen 4, the one pointed at the back corner near the freezers, a figure stood perfectly still. Marcus hadn't heard the door chime. He hadn't seen anyone enter. But there it was, a dark silhouette that seemed to absorb the light around it rather than reflect it. The figure's head tilted at an angle that made Marcus's stomach drop, too far to the left, like a puppet with a broken string. He glanced up from the monitor toward the actual aisle. Empty. He looked back at the screen. The figure had moved closer to the camera, though Marcus hadn't seen it take a single step. Its face, if you could call it that, was a pale blur, features smeared like wet paint. The door chime finally rang. Marcus jumped, his hand knocking over his lukewarm coffee. A woman walked in, normal, human, pulling her jacket tight against the October cold. She smiled at him, that tired 4 a.m. smile of someone picking up milk before an early shift. "Cold one tonight," she said. Marcus nodded, unable to speak, his eyes darting between her and the security monitor. The figure was gone. The back corner was empty again. But on the counter, where his coffee had spilled, the liquid had formed a shape. It looked like a handprint. A handprint with 6 fingers. Welcome back to the channel. Drop a comment below and tell me, where are you watching from? And if you're working the night shift right now, maybe check your security cameras. Hit that like button if you dare, and subscribe if you want more stories that'll make you question what's real. Because after tonight, you might never look at your local corner store the same way again. Chen had been working at Savamart on 145th and Amsterdam for 8 months. It wasn't glamorous, but it paid his NYU tuition and kept him fed. The store was one of those 24-hour places that serviced the neighborhood. Cramped aisles stuffed with everything from toilet paper to bootleg DVDs, fluorescent lights that hummed constantly, and a perpetual smell of stale coffee and bleach. The day's shift was chaos. Mothers buying diapers and snacks for their kids, construction workers grabbing energy drinks, teenagers skipping school to buy Lucy's and Arizona iced tea. But Marcus worked nights, 10 p.m. to 6 a.m., 4 days a week. The night shift was different. Quieter. Stranger. His co-worker, Mrs. Patterson, an older black woman who'd worked there for 15 years, had trained him during his first week. She'd shown him how to work the register, where they kept the mop, how to handle shoplifters without causing a scene. But on his last training night, as she was gathering her things to leave, she'd paused by the door. "Marcus, baby, listen to me," she'd said, her voice dropping low. "Some customers, they don't look right. They come in late, real late. Between 3 and 4, mostly. When they do, you ring them up, you take their money, and you don't ask questions. You understand?" Marcus had laughed it off. "Don't ask questions? Like what, are they criminals or something?" Mrs. Patterson's face had been dead serious. "Just don't look too long. Don't engage more than you have to. And Marcus?" She'd gripped his arm. "Don't ever follow them to the back of the store." He thought she was messing with him. Some kind of hazing ritual for the new guy. But Mrs. Patterson had quit 2 weeks later. Didn't give notice, didn't say goodbye. Just stopped showing up. The owner, Mr. Kim, had seemed unsurprised, almost resigned, when he hired Marcus for the full night shift. For the first few months, everything had been normal. Sure, there were the usual weirdos, drunk guys looking for beer after hours, insomniacs buying strange combinations of items at 2 a.m., the occasional person clearly high out of their mind. But nothing that warranted Mrs. Patterson's cryptic warning. Then October came. The first incident had been subtle. A man had walked in around 3:15 a.m., dressed in a dark suit despite the warm weather. He'd moved through the aisles slowly, methodically, picking up items and putting them back without looking at them. His movements had been fluid, too fluid, like he was floating rather than walking. When he'd approached the counter with a single can of soup, Marcus had noticed his hands. The skin was gray, almost translucent, and when Marcus had taken the $5 bill from him, it had been ice cold. Not cool. Ice cold, like it had been stored in a freezer. The man hadn't spoken, hadn't made eye contact, had simply taken his change and left, the door chime ringing in his wake. When Marcus had checked the $5 bill, he noticed it was dated 1987. Crisp and new, as if it had been printed yesterday. That's when Marcus had started paying attention. That's when he'd begun to notice the patterns, the subtle wrongness that permeated certain customers. And that's when he'd realized that Mrs. Patterson hadn't been joking at all. She'd been trying to warn him. The night everything changed started like any other. Tuesday, October 17th. Marcus clocked in at 10 p.m. sharp, relieving the evening shift worker, a college kid named Devin who always seemed eager to leave. "Yo, Marcus, it's been dead tonight," Devin had said, already halfway out the door. "Might actually be boring for you." "Later, man." Marcus had settled into his routine. Restocking the cigarette display, organizing the lottery tickets, brewing a fresh pot of the cheap coffee that nobody ever bought. By midnight, he'd had maybe 5 customers. By 2 a.m., he'd finished his economics homework and started browsing his phone. At 3:23 a.m., the temperature dropped. It happened suddenly, dramatically. One moment, the store was its usual stuffy warmth. The next, Marcus could see his breath misting in the air. The thermostat on the wall read 71 degrees, but it felt like 40. He grabbed his hoodie from behind the counter, zipping it up, confused. The heating system was old, sure, but it had never cut out like this. That's when he heard it. A wet, dragging sound coming from the back of the store. Like something heavy being pulled across the linoleum floor. Marcus looked up at the security monitors, cycling through the 4 cameras. Nothing. All the aisles were empty. The sound came again. Closer. "We're closed for restocking," Marcus called out, his voice cracking slightly. It was a lie, but something in his gut told him to establish a boundary. "Come back in 20 minutes. The dragging stopped. Silence pressed against his eardrums. Even the constant hum of the refrigerators seemed muted. Marcus's hand moved toward his phone, ready to call. Who? The police? And say what? That he heard a weird noise. The door chime rang. Marcus's head snapped toward the entrance. A woman stood there. At least, he thought it was a woman. She was tall, maybe 6 feet, wearing a long dress that looked like it was from another era. Dark fabric, high collar, long sleeves despite the earlier warm October day. Her hair was black and hung in wet strands around her face, even though it hadn't rained in a week. "We're open," she said. Her voice was wrong. Too flat, like a recording played back slightly too slow. Yeah?" Marcus stammered. "Yeah, we are. Can I help you find something?" The woman didn't answer. She glided, and there was no other word for it, toward aisle 5, the one with household supplies and personal care items. Marcus watched on the monitor as she moved through the frame. The camera glitched as she passed, horizontal lines of static cutting across the image. He tried to look away, to focus on his phone, on anything else. But he couldn't. Something compelled him to watch as she picked up items with jerky, mechanical movements. A bottle of bleach. A box of garbage bags. A package of plastic gloves. The kind of items that, bought together, would send up red flags in any other context. She approached the counter. Up close, Marcus could see that her skin had a waxy quality, like melted candles. Her eyes were completely black, no whites, no iris, just solid black orbs that seemed to absorb light. When she breathed, her chest didn't move. 2417, Marcus said, his voice barely above a whisper. His training kicked in on autopilot. Ring them up. Take their money. Don't ask questions. The woman reached into her purse, a vintage thing that looked like it belonged in a museum, and pulled out a stack of bills. All old. All dated from the 1970s and 80s. She placed them on the counter with hands that had too many knuckles, fingers that bent in ways human fingers shouldn't. Marcus took the money. It was damp and smelled like soil, like something dug up from underground. He counted it quickly, hands shaking, and gave her the change. The woman took it without a word, gathered her items, and walked toward the door. She paused at the threshold. "You shouldn't be here alone," she said, still in that flat, wrong voice. "They're coming for what they left behind." Before Marcus could respond, she was gone. The door chime rang one final time, and suddenly the temperature returned to normal. The suffocating silence lifted. The refrigerators hummed back to their usual volume. Marcus stood there, gripping the counter, trying to process what had just happened. He looked down at the bills in his hand. They were starting to deteriorate, the paper crumbling at the edges like they were hundreds of years old rather than decades. Within seconds, they turned to dust, leaving only coins in the register. His phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "Check the freezer in the back. What they buried isn't staying buried. P. Mrs. Patterson." Marcus's heart hammered in his chest. Every instinct screamed at him to ignore the text, to stay behind the counter until his shift ended, to pretend nothing had happened. But his curiosity, that deadly human curiosity, won out. He grabbed the baseball bat they kept under the counter for robberies and walked toward the back of the store. The fluorescent lights flickered as he passed under them, casting dancing shadows on the walls. The dragging sound had stopped, but now there was something else. A low humming, almost like chanting, coming from the walk-in freezer in the storage area. The freezer door was slightly ajar. Frost crept out from the gap, spreading across the floor in unnatural patterns that looked almost like writing, like symbols from a language that predated human civilization. Marcus reached for the handle, the metal burning cold against his palm, even through his sleeve. He pulled the door open. Inside, between the boxes of frozen French fries and chicken wings, was a hole. Not a hole in the floor, a hole in space itself, a darkness so complete it seemed to curve reality around it. And from that darkness came whispers, dozens of them, overlapping, speaking in languages he didn't understand but somehow felt in his bones. Something moved in the black. A pale hand reached out, then another, then dozens more, pulling themselves toward the light. Toward him. Marcus slammed the door shut and stumbled backward. His bat clattered to the floor. The chanting grew louder, no longer just from the freezer but from the walls, the ceiling, the floor beneath his feet. The entire store was waking up. And whatever had been sleeping here, buried here, forgotten here, it was hungry. Marcus ran back to the counter, his mind racing. He grabbed his phone with shaking hands and pulled up Mrs. Patterson's contact. His thumb hovered over the call button, but then he remembered, she'd quit. Changed her number. The text had come from an unknown sender. He tried anyway. The call went straight to a disconnected message. "Damn it!" he shouted into the empty store. The lights began to flicker in sequence, starting from the back and moving forward like a wave approaching the counter. With each flicker, Marcus caught glimpses of figures standing in the aisles. There one moment, gone the next. Watching him. 4 a.m. The dead hour. The hour Mrs. Patterson had warned him about. His training manual, the one Mr. Kim had given him on his first day, sat in a drawer beneath the register. Marcus had never read past the first few pages, finding it mostly filled with mundane corporate policies about cash handling and customer service. But now, with trembling fingers, he flipped through it desperately. Most of it was standard fare. Then, tucked in the back, he found a section printed on different paper, older, yellowed with age. The heading read, "Protocol for Unusual Customer Interactions, Night Shift Only." The rules were simple. 1. Never make direct eye contact with customers who appear between 3 and 5 a.m. 2. Do not question their purchases, no matter how unusual the combination. 3. Accept all forms of payment, regardless of condition or date. 4. If a customer speaks to you first, respond minimally. Do not engage in conversation. 5. Never, under any circumstances, go to the back storage area during these hours. 6. If the temperature drops suddenly, remain at the counter until it normalizes. 7. The store has a history. Do not dig into it. 8. If you see the door to the freezer open, close it immediately and sprinkle salt across the threshold. 9. Keep salt behind the counter at all times. 10. Some customers aren't customers. They're looking for something. Don't let them find it. Marcus's hands shook as he read. Salt. He needed salt. He ducked down and searched the cabinet beneath the register, finding an old canister tucked in the back corner, covered in dust. The label was in Korean, and the container was sealed with what looked like red wax. The door chime rang. Marcus's head shot up. 3 figures stood at the entrance. They looked almost human, almost. The one in front was a man in a business suit, but his proportions were wrong. Arms too long, head too small, fingers that nearly reached his knees. Behind him stood 2 others, a teenage boy whose eyes were entirely white, and an elderly woman who walked backward, her head rotated 180 degrees so she could see where she was going. We're looking for something, the long-armed man said. His voice echoed, like multiple people speaking in unison. Something that was taken from us. Something buried here, before this was a store. Marcus gripped the salt canister. We close in 2 hours. You need to come back during business hours. The teenager laughed, a sound like breaking glass. This place is always open to us. It's built on our ground. Our bones are in the foundation. Our blood is in the walls. They began to move through the store, not toward the freezer, but systematically, searching. The elderly woman walked backward down aisle 1, her arthritic fingers running along the shelves. Items fell as she passed, cans of soup, boxes of cereal, bottles of soda, but they didn't fall down. They fell up, hitting the ceiling and staying there, defying gravity. The teenage boy phased through aisle 3, his translucent form visible through the shelving units. Where he passed, products rotted instantly, bread molding, fruit decomposing, milk curdling in their containers. The long-armed man stayed near the entrance, his head swiveling in a complete circle, scanning the store. Where is the door? He demanded. Where is the passage? Marcus's mind raced back to the freezer, to the hole in space he'd seen. That's what they were looking for. The passage. But why? And what would happen if they found it? Another customer entered. This one was different, a woman in a nurse's uniform that looked like it was from the 1950s, complete with the white cap and pin. But unlike the others, she seemed solid, real. She walked with purpose to the counter. You need to close that door in the back, she said urgently, her voice normal, human. Every October 17th, it tries to open. This building used to be something else, before it was a store. Before it was a restaurant. Before it was a boarding house. It was a passage point. A place where things crossed over. Who are you? Marcus whispered. Someone who used to work here, in another life. In 1952, we tried to seal it. Use salt, iron, and old words. But every 43 years, on this date, the seal weakens. They come looking for it, trying to open it fully. She glanced at the 3 creatures searching the store. Those are the scouts. If they report back that the passage is opening, more will come. Hundreds. And they won't just stay in the store. What do I do? The nurse pulled out a folded piece of paper from her pocket and slid it across the counter. The words are written here. In the freezer, pour the salt in a circle around the opening. Say the words 3 times. It'll hold for another 43 years. And if I don't? Harlem becomes a feeding ground. The store is the anchor point. If the passage opens fully, the boundary between their world and ours collapses. Not just here, anywhere they've left markers. And trust me, They've left markers all over the city. Before Marcus could ask more questions, the long-armed man's head snapped toward the back of the store. I smell it, he said, his voice rising with excitement. The cold place. The door. All three creatures immediately changed direction, moving toward the storage area with disturbing speed. The backward-walking woman's head spun around to face forward, revealing a mouth full of needle-like teeth. The teenage boy became solid, his white eyes fixed on the back hallway. Now! The nurse shouted. Go now, before they reach it! Marcus grabbed the salt canister and the paper, vaulting over the counter. He sprinted toward the storage area, the bat still in his other hand. Behind him, he heard the creatures shrieking, a sound that made his ears bleed. The lights exploded one by one as they gave chase, glass raining down. He burst through the storage area door. The freezer door was wide open now, and the hole had grown. It was 6 feet across, a swirling vortex of darkness and reaching hands. Things were climbing out, humanoid shapes with too many limbs, faces that split open vertically, bodies that flickered between solid and smoke. Marcus broke the seal on the salt canister with shaking hands. He began to pour it around the hole, creating a circle. The salt hissed where it touched the darkness, steam rising. The hands reaching from the void recoiled, burning. The long-armed man appeared in the doorway, followed by the others. Stop him! He commanded. They rushed forward, but the nurse was suddenly there, standing between them and Marcus. She spread her arms, and her form began to glow with a soft, warm light. You have no power here anymore, she said firmly. This ground was cleansed once. It can be cleansed again. Marcus completed the circle and unfolded the paper. The words were in a language he didn't recognize, but somehow, when he looked at them, he knew how to pronounce them. He began to speak. The creatures screamed. The store shook. Products flew off the shelves. The building itself seemed to groan in protest. But Marcus kept speaking, his voice growing stronger with each repetition. The nurse's light grew brighter, forcing the creatures to retreat. On the third repetition, the hole began to close. The hands withdrew, the darkness constricting, pulling back into wherever it had come from. The temperature in the freezer began to rise. The whispers faded to silence. With a final, thunderous crack, the hole sealed completely. Where it had been, only a scorch mark remained on the freezer floor, shaped like a perfect circle. Marcus turned. The creatures were gone. The nurse was fading, her form becoming translucent. She smiled at him. You did well, she said. The store is safe. This city is safe. For now. Wait, Marcus called out. What is this place? What was it before? A crossing point, she said, her voice distant now. Where the Lenape performed their rituals. Where Dutch settlers built their gallows. Where runways from the Underground Railroad rested before moving north. Always a threshold. Always a door. Some doors should stay closed. Will they come back? Not in your lifetime. Maybe not in anyone's lifetime, if the city keeps changing, keeps building, keeps covering the old places with new. But someone will need to work this shift. Someone will need to watch. Someone will need to remember. She was almost gone now, just a shimmer in the air. Tell the next person. Like Mrs. Patterson told you. Like I was told. Keep the salt. Keep the words. Keep the watch. And then she was gone completely. Marcus stood alone in the freezer, his breath returning to normal, the temperature rising back to its standard Arctic cold. The scorch mark on the floor was already fading, like the building itself was trying to forget what had happened. He walked back into the store proper. The destruction was minimal, a few fallen products, some broken light bulbs, nothing that would raise too many questions. But the feeling was different. The air felt lighter, cleaner, like a fever had broken. 5:47 a.m. Sunrise was approaching. The night was almost over. Marcus began cleaning up, his movements automatic. He swept up the glass, restocked the fallen items, made note of the damaged goods for the morning manager. As he worked, his mind processed everything that had happened. Part of him wanted to believe it was a hallucination, a dream brought on by too many overnight shifts and too little sleep. But the salt canister on the counter was real. The paper with the words was real. And when he checked the security footage, something in him knew he had to. The recordings from 3 a.m. onward were completely corrupted. Just static and distortion, as if something had deliberately erased them. At 5:55 a.m., the door chime rang one final time. Marcus's head snapped up, his hand instinctively reaching for the salt. But it was just a regular customer. An older man, maybe 70, in a Yankees cap and worn jacket. He nodded at Marcus and headed straight for the coffee pot. "Rough night?" the man asked as he poured himself a cup. Marcus let out a shaky laugh. "You have no idea." "Oh, I think I do." The man approached the counter, setting down his coffee and a pack of gum. "Been coming to this store for 30 years. Different owners, different names, but always the same building. Always the same energy." He leaned in closer, his eyes sharp despite his age. "My grandfather worked on the construction crew when they built this place in 1952. Told me stories about what they found when they dug the foundation. Old bones. Strange symbols. A stone door that led to nowhere. The crew wanted to stop the project, but the developer pushed through. Said they sealed whatever was there with salt and iron." "They did," Marcus said quietly. The old man nodded. "Every few decades, someone working the night shift has to deal with it. Has to remember. Has to keep watch." He pulled out exact change for his coffee and gum. "You handled it well, son. Better than most." "How do you know?" "Because you're still here. Because the sun came up. Because the city's still standing." He pocketed his change and picked up his coffee. "Mrs. Patterson said you were a smart kid? Said you'd figure it out." "You know Mrs. Patterson?" "Everyone who's worked the night shift here knows Mrs. Patterson. In one form or another." He moved toward the door, then paused. "Keep that salt handy. Keep those words safe. And when you're ready to move on, when you've had enough, pass them to whoever comes next. That's how this works. That's how it's always worked." "Wait," Marcus called out. "How many times has this happened? How many people have had to do this?" The old man smiled sadly. "Every 43 years since 1909. You're the 5th guardian, Marcus. Won't be the last. This city has a lot of old places. A lot of old doors. Someone has to keep them closed." He left, the door chime ringing cheerfully behind him, as if this were just another normal morning, another normal customer getting his coffee before starting his day. Marcus stood behind the counter as the sun finally broke over the horizon, golden light streaming through the storefront windows. He watched the neighborhood wake up, people heading to work, kids walking to school, delivery trucks making their rounds. Normal life. Human life. Oblivious to what had almost broken through in the darkest hours. His phone buzzed. A text from Mr. Kim. "Everything okay? Security cameras went out last night." Marcus typed back. "Everything's fine. Just a power surge. All handled." Another text came through, from an unknown number. "Thank you for keeping watch. P." Marcus saved the number this time. Then he opened the drawer beneath the register, placed the salt canister and the folded paper inside, and added his own note to the protocol manual. October 17th, 2023. 5th sealing successful. The door remains closed. Next guardian. The passage tries to open every 43 years. You'll know when it's time. Trust your instincts. Trust the old customers. And never, ever let them reach the freezer. MC. He closed the manual and returned it to its place just as Devin walked in for the morning shift, coffee in hand and a smile on his face. "Yo, Marcus! How was the night? Dead as usual?" Marcus looked at him, at his innocent, unscarred face, At the ordinary morning light filtering through the windows, at the regular customers starting to trickle in for their breakfast sandwiches and lottery tickets. "Yeah," Marcus said finally, grabbing his backpack. "Dead as usual." But as he walked out into the bright October morning, he could feel the weight of the salt canister in his pocket, the one he'd taken from the backup supply in the back. Just in case. Because he knew now that October 17th, 2066 would come eventually. And someone would need to be ready. Someone would need to remember. Someone would need to keep watch. The next few nights, Marcus approached his shifts with a new awareness. The store felt different now, not threatening, but watchful. Protective, almost. Like it knew he'd kept his end of the bargain. He researched the building's history during his downtime. The old man had been right. This plot of land had been significant for centuries. Before the store, it had been a boarding house in the 1940s. Before that, a speakeasy during Prohibition. Before that, a church that burned down under mysterious circumstances in 1897. And before all of that, the records went dark, lost to time. But there were hints in old newspaper archives and historical society documents. Stories of strange disappearances in this specific block. Reports of unusual cold spots. Accounts from Dutch colonists about the local Lenape people performing rituals here, saying it was a thin place, where the spirit world came close to ours. Every culture that had lived here had known. They'd all tried to seal it, to control it, to keep the door closed. And every 43 years someone had to reinforce that seal. Mrs. Patterson called him 3 days after the incident. The same unknown number from the texts. "You did good, baby," she said, her voice warm and familiar. "I'm sorry I couldn't warn you better. Sometimes you have to see it to believe it." "Why didn't you just tell me?" Marcus asked. "Would you have believed me?" "Really believed me?" She laughed softly. "No. You needed to experience it. That's the only way the knowledge sticks. That's the only way you become a proper guardian." "How long did you do it?" 12 years. Started when I was 25, fresh out of college. Figured it was a simple cashier job. She paused. "It's not forever, Marcus. Just until you're ready to pass it on. Until you find someone you trust to take over. Someone smart enough, brave enough, and curious enough to handle it when the time comes again. The next opening is in 2066. I'll be in my 60s. Then you've got time to train someone right. Time to prepare them better than I prepared you." Her voice softened. "I know it's a burden. But it's also important. This city has millions of people. They're safe because someone kept watch. Because someone remembered. Because someone cared enough to stand in the cold and hold the line." After they hung up, Marcus felt something he hadn't expected. Pride. Purpose. For the first time since starting college, since moving to New York, since taking this job to pay his bills, he felt like he was doing something that mattered. The store returned to its normal rhythm. Regular customers, normal transactions, the usual cast of characters that made up late-night Harlem. But Marcus noticed things now. The way certain older customers nodded at him with knowing eyes. The way some people would pause at the threshold, as if sensing something before entering. The way the store itself seemed to breathe, to pulse with an ancient heartbeat. He wasn't just a cashier anymore. He was a guardian. And he would keep watch until it was time to pass the torch. 3 weeks after the incident, on a quiet Thursday night, a young woman came in around 2 a.m. She was in scrubs, clearly coming off a hospital shift, and she grabbed a sandwich and an energy drink. Normal. Human. Tired. At the counter, as Marcus rang her up, she glanced at him and smiled. "You work nights? That must be tough." "It has its moments," Marcus said, handing her the receipt. "I bet. I'm starting night shifts next month at Mount Sinai. Any advice?" Marcus paused, looking at her, really looking. There was something familiar about her eyes, a sharpness, an awareness. And when she'd entered the store, She'd hesitated at the threshold for just a moment, her hand brushing the doorframe as if feeling for something. "Stay alert," he said carefully. "Trust your instincts. And if something feels wrong, it probably is." She nodded slowly, then reached into her pocket and pulled out a small object, setting it on the counter. It was a coin, old and worn, with strange symbols etched into its surface. The same symbols Marcus had seen in the scorch mark on the freezer floor. "My grandmother gave me this," she said quietly. "Said it was for protection. Said I'd know when I needed to use it." She met his eyes. "Said I'd meet someone who would teach me why." Marcus's heart rate picked up. This wasn't coincidence. This was how it worked. How the knowledge passed. How guardians found each other. "What's your name?" he asked. "Aisha. Aisha Patterson." "Patterson. Of course. Mrs. Patterson is your grandmother?" "Was. She passed last week." Aisha's eyes were clear despite the obvious grief. "But before she did, she told me about this place. About the door. About the watch. She said I'd be the next one, 43 years from now. Said I needed to learn from whoever was keeping it now." She picked up her food. "That's you, isn't it?" Marcus found himself smiling despite the weight of what this meant. "Yeah. That's me. Then I guess I'll see you around. I'll be doing clinicals in the area for the next year. Figured I'd stop by when I can. Learn the job." After she left, Marcus pulled out his phone and looked at the last text from Mrs. Patterson. Below it, a new message had appeared, sent from her number just minutes ago. "She's ready. Teach her well. And Marcus? Thank you for giving an old woman peace in her final days. Knowing the city is protected, that the watch continues, that's all any of us can hope for. Patricia Patterson, 1952 to 2023 inch." Marcus stared at the message, a chill running down his spine. Mrs. Patterson had died a week ago. Which meant this text, like the guidance during the incident, like the nurse in the freezer, had come from somewhere else. From someone else. From whatever remained when a guardian's watch ended. He looked around the store, at the flickering lights, at the shadows in the corners, at the front door where Aisha had paused. How many guardians were still watching? How many remained, in whatever form consciousness took after death, making sure the seals held? Marcus wasn't alone in this. He never had been. The store wasn't just protected by salt and words. It was protected by everyone who'd ever stood watch, everyone who'd ever kept the door closed, everyone who'd ever chosen duty over safety. And when his time came, when he passed the torch to Aisha and whoever came after her, he'd still be here too. Still watching. Still keeping guard. Because some doors must never open. And some watches never truly end.